As she danced with him at a family barbecue, I handed her ring to her sister and walked away. That 30-second decision destroyed my marriage, but it saved my life. What I would soon discover about my wife's business meetings would shock you. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was stealing everything. My name is Gart Dunlap. I'm 42 years old, and I own Dunlap's Diesel and Auto, the only heavy truck repair shop in Cedar Falls that'll work on a big rig at 3 in the morning when some poor soul is stranded on the interstate. I built this business from nothing with these two hands and a whole lot of stubbornness. For 15 years, it's been my life, until the moment my world decided to fall apart. I met Lohane 5 years ago at a diner off Highway 9. She was a waitress there, trying to make ends meet after a bad divorce, raising her daughter, Mila, on her own. Mila was 10 back then, scared, angry at the world, and missing a deadbeat dad who'd vanished like smoke in the wind. Lohane had these tired eyes that just lit up when she smiled. There was something about her that grabbed a hold of me and wouldn't let go. I fell hard and fast, not just for Lohane, but for both of them. Mila needed a father figure, and I needed a family. We moved in together after 8 months, got married a year later. Best decision I ever made. Or so I thought. Mila started calling me dad within 6 months. That little girl had me wrapped around her finger, faster than a hydraulic jack lifts a semi. We'd tinker with small engines in the garage, lawnmowers, go-karts, anything with moving parts. She had a natural gift for it. She could diagnose a problem just by the sound of an engine running. Made me proud as hell. Lohane seemed happy too. She quit her waitressing job and started handling the books for the shop. She said she wanted to be a bigger part of what I'd built, to help it grow. She was good with numbers. Better than me, anyway. Within 2 years, our revenue was up 30%. But looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when things started to change. It was subtle at first. The way she'd tense up if I came home from the shop early. The way she'd angle her phone away from me when she was texting. Little things that didn't mean much on their own, but together, they added up to something I didn't want to see. The first real red flag popped up last winter. Lohane started talking about a new consultant she was working with, a guy named Otis Blackwood, famous for streamlining small company operations. It was always, Otis says we should restructure our debt. Otis thinks we need better inventory management. Otis has some really innovative ideas about expansion. I should have paid attention to the way her voice changed when she said his name. Should have noticed how she started dressing up on the days she had meetings with him. Should have questioned why a high-flying consultant was spending so much time on a small-town truck repair shop. But I trusted her. I trusted them both, and that trust is exactly what almost destroyed everything I'd spent my life building. The morning it all started to unravel began like any other Tuesday in March. I was under the hood of a Peterbilt, wrestling with a blown head gasket, when Lohane walked into the garage wearing a new dress, a navy blue thing with a belt that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bill. "Gart," she called out, using that careful tone she'd adopted lately. "I'm heading to my meeting with Otis. We're going over the quarterly projections." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked up. "Another meeting? Didn't you just see him yesterday?" Lohane's smile faltered for just a second. "This is important, honey. Otis thinks we can double our revenue if we implement his suggestions properly." "What kind of suggestions?" I asked, walking closer. Because last I checked, we were doing just fine without some slick consultant telling us how to run our business. "He's not just some consultant, Gart. Her voice took on that defensive edge. He has an MBA from Northwestern. He's worked with companies 10 times our size. I searched her face, looking for something I couldn't name. So, what's he doing in Cedar Falls? Working with a truck shop? He's between bigger projects. This is more of a favor. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll be back around 3. That's when I noticed it. The perfume. Lohane never wore perfume to business meetings. Hell, she barely wore it to Sunday service. But there she was, smelling like she was headed for a date, not a discussion about inventory management. After she left, I tried to focus on the Peterbilt, but my mind was spinning. I called my buddy Jake, who runs the auto parts store downtown. Jake, you know anything about this Otis Blackwood fella? I asked. Blackwood? He said. Heard the name. Drives that black BMW, always in an expensive suit. Word is he's been spending a lot of time at Murphy's pub lately. Murphy's? That didn't make sense. Lohane said their meetings were at his office. Yeah, it's strange, Jake continued. I was in there last Friday, around lunchtime, and I could have sworn I saw him having drinks with your Lohane. They looked pretty cozy from where I was sitting. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. You sure it was her? Pretty sure. She was wearing that red coat she always wears to the bank. I hung up and stared at the Peterbilt's engine. But I wasn't seeing pistons and valves anymore. I was seeing my wife's new clothes. The extra care she took with her makeup. The way she'd started locking her phone. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I drove by Blackwood's office building. His BMW was in the parking lot, but Lohane's Honda was nowhere in sight. I circled the block twice, then drove to Murphy's pub, and there they were, in a corner booth. Lohane was leaning forward, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting dangerously close to his. Blackwood was a slick-looking guy, mid-40s maybe, with silvering hair and a smile that probably worked on a lot of women. I sat in my truck across the street for 10 minutes, just watching them. Watching my wife act like a woman I didn't recognize. When she finally touched his hand, I started the engine and drove home. I didn't confront her that night. Maybe I should have. Instead, I waited. I watched, and I let the suspicion eat at me like acid. But it was Mila who delivered the final blow. I was in the garage, showing her how to change the transmission fluid on a '98 Ford, when she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that looked so much like her mother's. Dad, can I ask you something? Mila said, wiping grease from her hands. Shoot, kiddo. Is Mom having an affair? The question hit me like a sledgehammer. I saw her world getting ready to crumble all over again. That night, I waited up for Lohane. She came home at 11:30, claiming she'd been working late on the books. But her lipstick was gone, her hair was a mess, and she smelled faintly of a man's cologne. How was your night? I asked from the kitchen table. Fine, she said, not meeting my eyes. Just a lot of boring numbers. Funny, I said, standing up slowly. Jake saw you at the mall with Otis today. The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she was going to confess. Then that familiar wall of defiance went up. Jake's mistaken, she said coolly. I was here all afternoon. Lohane, I said, my voice quiet but hard. Our daughter saw you too. Her mask finally cracked. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. But she just turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, wondering how long I'd been living with a stranger. 2 weeks later, Lohane's sister, Rebecca, invited us to her annual Memorial Day barbecue. This year, I had a feeling Otis Blackwood might make an appearance. And I was right. He arrived fashionably late, holding a bottle of wine, that probably cost more than my car payment. Lohane was at the grill, flipping burgers, when he walked into the backyard. I saw her face light up like it was Christmas morning before she quickly composed herself. But I'd seen enough. The afternoon dragged on with forced conversations and fake smiles. I watched Lohane and Otis carefully avoid each other, while somehow always ending up in the same conversations. They had perfected a subtle dance. Eye contact from across the yard, a discreet brush of hands while passing a plate. But it was the last dance of the night that broke me. Rebecca had a sound system on the deck, and some slow, romantic ballad was playing. I was helping clear the grill when I glanced over and saw them. Lohane was in Otis's arms, moving slowly to the music like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Her hand was on the back of his neck, her fingers toying with the collar of his shirt. He was whispering something in her ear that made her laugh, that genuine, carefree laugh I hadn't heard in months. They looked like lovers. I walked over to the table where Rebecca was sitting. I reached into Lohane's purse, pulled out the diamond ring it took me 2 years to save for, and pressed it into Rebecca's palm. Her eyes went wide. "Tell my wife," I said, my voice steady, that while she was dancing with him, I was giving her ring to her sister and walking away. I didn't wait for a reply. I just walked to my truck and drove off, leaving behind 5 years of marriage and a family I thought was real. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to my parents' house. "Gart," my mom said, opening the door. "What's wrong, son?" "Lohane's cheating on me," I said, the words tasting like gravel. We sat in their kitchen, and I told them everything. "There's more," I said, taking a deep breath. "I think Blackwood is after more than just my wife." I explained my suspicions about the business, the debt consolidation Lohane had been pushing, the way Blackwood seemed to know far too much about our finances. "Son," my dad said slowly, "you need to protect yourself. You get a lawyer first thing Monday morning." When I finally went back to the house on Sunday night, Lohane was waiting for me. Her face was calm, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. "We need to talk," she said. "Yeah, we do." I sat across from her, keeping my distance. "You can start by explaining why you're destroying our family for some con man." "He's not a con man," she answered suddenly. Then her voice caught. "Gareth, what we had, it wasn't working anymore. And you decided to fix it by getting into bed with another man. That was never the intention. Otis understands me in a way you never could." "He understands you," I repeated, the rhyme landing without a trace of humor. "He understands your bank account numbers, Lohane. He understands the company assets and the property deeds. You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I don't? Because I've been doing a little digging of my own. Your boyfriend has been married 3 times. Each marriage ended with the wife losing her business or her family's money. He's a predator, Lohane." She stood up, rage flashing in her eyes. "You're just jealous because he can give me things you never could." "Like what? A criminal record? Because that's where this is headed." "He loves me," she said, but her voice wavered. "He loves what you can give him. The minute he's squeezed you dry, he'll be gone." That's when Mila appeared in the doorway. "Mom, is it true? Are you really leaving us for that creep?" Lohane looked at her daughter. She truly looked at her. And for a moment, I thought she might wake up from whatever spell Blackwood had cast. But then her face hardened. Monday morning brought a shock that felt like a sledgehammer to the gut. I was just opening the shop when my bank manager, Tom Uri, called. his voice laced with panic. Gareth, I need you to come down here, right away. Someone's been moving money around in your business accounts. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Tom's office, staring at paperwork that made my blood boil. Lohane had used her power of attorney to secure a massive business loan, using the garage's assets as collateral. The money, nearly $200,000, had been wired to an investment account managed by Blackwood's consulting firm. When did this happen? I asked, my hands shaking with rage. Friday afternoon. Your wife came in with all the paperwork in order. Said it was for expansion, for upgrades. Friday, the day after the barbecue. While I was still trying to process their public display, they were already gutting our finances. Can we stop it? Tom shook his head gravely. Not without her signature or a court order. Technically, she had the legal authority to make those transactions. I drove straight back to the garage, where I found 3 customers waiting for their trucks and no sign of Lohane. When I called her cell, it went straight to voicemail. Same for the office line. That's when Jake from the parts store walked in with more bad news. Gareth, hate to be the bearer of more trouble, but I need to get paid on that outstanding invoice. My supplier is leaning on me. What outstanding invoice? The one your wife authorized last month. 12 grand in specialty parts for the Hendricks fleet job. I pulled up our accounting software on the computer. There was no Hendricks fleet job, no special parts order. But there was a $12,000 debit from our account. My phone rang. It was Bill Hendricks himself. Gareth, I've been trying to reach your wife. We need to talk about the delays on our truck maintenance contract. What delays, Bill? Well, we prepaid for 6 months of service, but none of our trucks have been scheduled yet. Lohane said you were swamped, but it's been 8 weeks. Another missing sum, another lie. The scale of what they had done was beginning to sink in. By noon, I'd discovered that nearly every major account had been looted or compromised, parts ordered that were never delivered, services paid for that were never performed, cash deposits that had mysteriously vanished from the operating account. Lohane and Blackwood hadn't just stolen my money, they had systematically destroyed my business's reputation. I was sitting in the ruins of everything I had built when Mila walked into the garage after school. One look at my face was all it took. It's bad, isn't it, Dad? It's bad, I admitted. They wiped us out. She sat on the workbench beside me, this 15-year-old girl showing more strength than her mother ever had. So what do we do now? I looked around at the tools I'd collected over 15 years, at the bays where I'd built my reputation, one satisfied customer at a time. At the office where I'd dreamed of expanding, of leaving something behind for the family I thought I had. We fight, I said. We fight with everything we have. That afternoon, I did 3 things. First, I called the best divorce attorney in the county. Second, I filed a police report for embezzlement and fraud. Third, I had every lock on the house and the garage changed. Lohane had made her choice. Now, she would have to live with the consequences. 3 weeks later, in the thick of the legal battle, with lawyers' bills piling up and the stress eating me alive, she walked back into my life like a ghost from another era. Yvonne Voix. I was at Marfa's, nursing my second bourbon and trying to forget that my business was bleeding cash, when I heard that familiar laugh from across the room. 22 years melted away in an instant. There she was, still beautiful at 40, still carrying that easy confidence that had captivated me in high school. Garth Dunlap, she said, sliding onto the stool across from me. I heard you were in some trouble. News travels fast in a small town, I replied, studying her face. What brings you back, Yvonne? My mother's funeral was last month. I'm just settling her estate. She paused, her green eyes softening. I heard about Lohane too. I'm sorry. Sorry? The bourbon was making me bold. Why? If I remember correctly, you predicted this exact scenario about 20 years ago. She had too. The night before I left for college, she begged me to take her with me. She said we belonged together, that we could make it work anywhere. But I was young and stupid, convinced I needed to see the world before I settled down. I was 18 and jealous, she said. I didn't want to lose you to some college girl. Instead, you lost me to pride and bad timing. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what could have been hanging between us, like smoke. I'm divorced now, she said quietly. 3 years. Turns out my ex-husband was more interested in my inheritance than me. Seems to be a theme in my life lately. Yvonne reached across the table and touched my hand. Gareth, I know this is complicated, but I never stopped caring about you. When I heard what happened, I had to see if you were okay. The touch of her skin sent a current up my arm, but alarm bells were screaming in my head. It was all too perfect, too convenient. How did you hear about my situation? Exactly, I asked, pulling my hand back. Small town gossip, she said, but something flickered in her eyes. You know how people talk. That night, after Yvonne left with a promise to call the next day, I did some checking. What I found turned my stomach. Yvonne's mother had passed away 18 months ago, not last month. The estate had been settled a year ago, and according to her social media, she'd been living back in Cedar Falls for 6 months, meaning she'd been around for the entire collapse of my marriage, only making her move after my financial troubles became public. I called my lawyer first thing in the morning. Sandra, I need you to run a background check on someone. Yvonne Voix. Any particular reason? A gut feeling. But I'm starting to think my problems are bigger than a cheating wife and a con artist. The background check on Yvonne came back 3 days later, and it was worse than I imagined. She wasn't just a lonely ex-girlfriend looking for comfort. She was a professional grifter with a rap sheet in 3 states. Insurance fraud in Nevada, Sandra read from her notes. Identity theft in Colorado. Marriage fraud in Texas. She specializes in targeting recently divorced men with significant assets. I felt sick. How did she know my situation so precisely? That's the most interesting part. She's been in contact with Otis Blackwood for months. Phone records show regular communication. They're working together. It was all an elaborate setup. Lohane seduces the target, creates the crisis. Then Yvonne swoops in as the sympathetic savior to finish the job. There's more, she continued. Yvonne has been sniffing around your parents, talking about some investment opportunities that could help you get back on your feet. Investment opportunity, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. But my eyes were locked on Yvonne. We were at my parents' house for dinner. Land development, she said smoothly. There's a company looking to build a new retail center. They're offering top dollar for the right properties. My mother looked confused. But we're not selling the farm. Of course not, Yvonne said quickly. But you could leverage its value. Use it as collateral to expand Gareth's business. Help him start over. I'd heard enough. Mom, Dad, can you give us a minute? Yvonne and I have some private business to discuss. After my parents left the room, I pulled out my phone and showed her the results of the background check. Interesting reading, I said quietly. Her mask slipped for a second, then the practiced smile returned. Gareth, you're clearly under a lot of stress. Enough of the theater, Yvonne. I know you're working with Blackwood. I know this was all planned. She rose slowly, her green eyes turning to ice. You can't prove a thing. I can prove enough to put you away for fraud and conspiracy. And your parents? So sweet. It would be a shame if something happened to their beautiful farm. The threat was subtle, but clear. I stepped closer, letting her see the steel in my eyes. Listen to me carefully, I said, my voice a low whisper. You're going to walk out of here and disappear. If I ever see you again, if you ever contact my family again, if you so much as drive down this street, I will personally make sure you spend the next 10 years in a federal prison. Is that clear? For the first time since she'd re-entered my life, Yvonne looked genuinely afraid. Crystal, she said. After she left, I sat my parents down and explained everything. The betrayal, the conspiracy, how close they'd come to losing the farm. How could we have been so blind? My mother asked. Because you're good people. You see the best in others, I answered. That's not a flaw. It's what makes you who you are. But from now on, we're going to be a lot more careful about who we trust. The trial of Lohane Dunlap and Otis Blackwood lasted 2 weeks. I was in that courtroom every single day, watching my ex-wife try to justify 5 years of lies and theft. Her lawyer painted her as a victim of manipulation, a lonely housewife seduced by a charming swindler. I didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. Mr. Dunlap, the prosecutor said when I took the stand, can you describe the financial impact of the defendant's actions on your business? They destroyed 15 years of work, I answered, looking directly at Lohane. They didn't just steal money, they stole trust. Clients who'd done business with me for decades started to question if I was honest. Suppliers started demanding cash up front. I was on the verge of losing everything. And the personal impact? I glanced over at Mila in the gallery. She had insisted on coming, said she wanted to see justice done. They tried to destroy my family. My stepdaughter lost her college fund. My parents nearly lost their farm. And a 16-year-old girl was forced to choose between her mother and the only stable home she's ever known. During cross-examination, Lohane's lawyer tried to paint me as controlling and suspicious. Isn't it true, Mr. Dunlap, that you spied on my client? That you followed her and invaded her privacy? Sir, when someone is stealing your life savings, keeping tabs isn't spying. It's self-defense. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom, and I saw a juror nod in agreement. Otis Blackwood got 12 years. Lohane got 6, with a chance of parole in 4 if she made full restitution. The judge ordered them to pay back every stolen dollar, plus damages. This court finds that the defendants engaged in a deliberate, calculated scheme to defraud Mr. Dunlap of his life's work. Judge Harrison said, the betrayal of trust by a spouse makes these crimes particularly heinous. After the sentencing, Mila and I walked out of the courthouse together. She had officially changed her name to Mila Dunlap the week before. She said she didn't want anything connecting her to her mother's crimes. How do you feel, Dad? She asked as we got to my truck. Like I can finally breathe again. The business was slowly recovering. The truth about what had really happened had spread, and customers were starting to come back. Some even apologized for doubting me, but the real victory was sitting next to me in that truck. A 16-year-old girl who chose loyalty over blood. Dad, Mila said as we drove home, I got into State University. Full scholarship. Kid, that's fantastic. When did you find out? Yesterday. But I wanted to wait until after the trial to tell you. I pulled the truck over and hugged her tight. Despite everything Lohane had done, despite the pain, and the chaos. This girl had flourished. She was stronger than both her parents combined. I'm proud of you, I told her. She just smiled. I learned from the best. 5 years later, I was in the garage, teaching my grandson how to change the oil on a 2010 Silverado. That's right, grandson. Mila had gotten married right out of college to a good man named Derek, who worked for the county road crew. Their son, little Garrett, was 3 years old and already fascinated by anything with an engine. Easy with that wrench, champ, I told him as he tried to tighten the drain plug. It's all about feel, not force. The shop was busier than ever. Word travels fast in a small town, and apparently, surviving a high-profile fraud case makes people trust your character. We'd expanded into 2 more bays and hired 3 full-time mechanics. Grandpa, little Garrett said, his face serious beneath his tiny ball cap. Why did Mila's first mommy go to prison? I glanced over at my wife, who was handling the books at the office desk. She gave me a small nod, a silent permission to be honest. Because she made bad choices, champ, I said. She chose money over family and lies over the truth. And when you make choices like that, there are consequences. But Mila, she chose you. And that choice, it made all the difference. My parents were doing well. Dad had finally retired from farming, but he still came by the shop most days to supervise and tell stories to the customers. Mom had become the world's most dedicated great-grandmother, spoiling little Garrett rotten. The farm was still in the family. We'd put it into a conservation trust to make sure no future con artist could ever threaten it again. As for Lohane, she was released after serving 3.5 years. She wrote letters to Mila from prison. Apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. Mila read every single one, but she never wrote back. I don't hate her, Mila told me one day, but I don't trust her either. And without trust, you have nothing. Smart girl. Always was. She was 21 when she graduated, 22 when she married Derek. Old enough to decide who deserved a place in her life. Otis Blackwood was still in federal prison. Last I heard, he was serving his time at a medium security facility in Ohio, running the prison library. I guess even con artists can find a kind of redemption if they look for it. That evening, after closing up the shop, I sat on the front porch with a beer and watched little Garrett play in the yard. Mila and Derek were talking about buying a house closer to town, but for now, 3 generations of our family were living under one roof, and it felt right. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me. Ellie. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without replying. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. The sun was setting over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. In the distance, I could hear the rumble of trucks on the highway. Trucks that might need fixing, driven by people who deserved an honest job for a fair price. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new opportunities to build something that lasts. But tonight, I was right where I needed to be, surrounded by a family that chose to be here, a business built on integrity, in a town that had seen me at my worst and still stood by me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's just living well.